Okay, we are live. All right, so um, yeah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Anne. I am an undergraduate in psychology. I actually graduate in less than a month now. I'm very nervous about that. And I'll be starting grad school in a master's in social work program. I have a YouTube channel called Through the Lens Discourse, or Through the Lens. It'll show like the tag name is Through the Lens, where I interview various people in different academic disciplines. Sometimes it's philosophy, sometimes it's psychology, sometimes neuroscience, and I have a political science or a political scientist interview I still have yet to upload, which I am really excited about. So yeah, that's what I do. And then I usually post political content or topics like veganism or other ethical topics on my TikTok page. And that is and debates with two S's at the end. And yeah, I mean, I can share my link tree later if you want, but that's
Awesome.
me.
And yeah, and all the links to Anne will be in the description of this video for anybody watching. Okay, so we're going to talk about feminism, and then we might talk about abortion separately on its own at the end of that. Um,
Cool.
so the main question I have is feminism needed in America today? The reason I say in America today is because we can look at issues that might be elsewhere. Like there's 27 countries where female circumcisions are still legal, and that's outrageous, and something might be needed there. I want to see if I can be convinced that feminism is needed today in America. And then I guess I want to read you the Oxford definition of feminism. And
Sure.
that the noun feminism is the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality of the sexes. Now, this is the definition I like. This is the definition that would lead me to have been a feminist at the time that I think that we didn't have the thing I just read. I think we have that today. But if I was around in the 1848, I would have hopefully been allowed to be at the Seneca Falls meeting. I named my daughter after Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I'm all about equality when it comes to rights. And so I view the word rights in this definition as referring to legal rights. Do you view at least that definition, even if that's not your definition? Do you view the advocacy of women's rights? Is the rights there referring to legal rights?
That's actually unclear. I would have to look. Maybe they have like a secondary definition, or maybe sometimes they'll have a word highlighted where it'll tell you like what a synonym for that word would be. That's unclear. I'm not sure.
Okay. So now that I've mentioned what that definition is, do you want to let me know your thoughts on that definition, but more so what your definition of feminism is?
Sure. So I'm fine with using a definition like that as long as there's an asterisk that indicates that those rights are both like moral, social, and legal rights. Sorry. So there can be something like contractual rights. I think that like we should advocate for women to have if they don't have contractual rights, even if those rights aren't like necessarily legal. I also think like there is some aspect to equality that's not necessarily legal. Like there's social and moral equality. So I think that's really important. And I think that that's what a lot of modern feminism focuses on.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we could get the legal rights part out of the way first then. Do you think there are any areas where females in this is complicated. Yeah, I was trying to see how we want to factor in like the existence of trans and all that. I'm just going to say females, and we can just take that as whatever we want that to mean.
Yeah.
Do you think that in the U.S. that there are any things that males can legally do that females cannot legally do, or where males are legally protected where females are not legally protected?
As of right now, not that I believe. I think there is current legislative push towards those things, which I would heavily advocate against. There's been a large push towards no fault marriages, abolishing no fault marriages, just to be clear. If you don't know what that is, a no fault marriage is the ability to get a divorce without having a reason that has to be approved by a court. So that means that you don't have to, there doesn't have to be like malice, intent, or actions or abuse or something like that involved for you to be able to go to the court and say, look, I don't want to be in this marriage anymore. There are actually people pushing against that, against women's ability to do that.
Well,
There
just
are
curious,
people
since you
like
brought
Andrew.
that up,
Sorry.
just curious if that were to be overturned, which I'm not saying I would want it to. If it
Right.
were, would that fit into this category, or would it be where both male and female cannot have a no fault divorce?
Legally, it would likely be for both. The only problem is socially, it would heavily impact women more.
Okay,
So in a sense, there's kind of like this concept of like the law does exist for both, but how is it effective for both?
gotcha. Okay, gotcha. Okay, and so so we agree that pretty much everything legal rights are good to go, where they used to not be, but now they are.
Ish. I think there is a bodily autonomy argument to be made on the case of abortion. And I don't disagree that abortion is not just a women's issue, like a women's rights issue. I think abortion is like a rights conflict issue as well. But I think that there are spheres of people pushing for anti abortion positions that do actually want to restrict women's legal bodily autonomy in that sense. So I think that there
Okay.
is some of that that is a women's rights issue, and some of that that is rightfully so an ethical concern.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
And gotcha. Okay. So I guess here's what I think would be good to do. And oftentimes I save this question for like the end of a conversation on a topic, but for this one, I'm just so curious to see if I can have my mind changed on this that I think maybe it's best to start off with this question. If you have a view of what feminism is, what you want it to achieve, what what would the world look not the world, what would the US look like for you to say, oh, okay, we as of today we don't need feminism. And what I mean by that is there back when we had slaves in the US, there would be slavery abolitionists. And once slavery became illegal, then slavery abolitionists, that movement became not needed anymore. Now, obviously, somebody could say like, I still claim to be part of the movement because if slavery ever comes back, we'd want to stop it. But essentially, unless that happened, that movement's done. And so, with feminism, you could obviously always, even if everything got achieved, you could say, I still want to call myself this because laws could change any time, and so we might need to fix things in the future. But what would it take? What would be the the minimum thing that it would take for you to say, like you just existing in this world on your platforms to your friends to say, like, oh yeah, feminism is not needed in America anymore?
So I take the abolitionist movement to kind of be in the way of somebody saying that they're anti slavery. So if someone
Hmm.
today claimed themselves as someone who is anti slavery, I'd be fine with that person saying that. I might find it
Hmm.
weird because the word abolition is specifically used to somebody who existed within that time frame where slavery was legal.
Hmm.
But if I said, today I'm anti-slavery, and what I mean by that actually might be more broad than it was back then. It might be, oh, I'm anti-slavery that exists in the Congo right now, where we're mining cobalt and exploiting people. I'm anti-slavery that exists in China, where we're funding, child labor, and like that type of slave labor. I'm against that type of thing. I'm against slave labor in prisons in America today. So there might be something like that where if I said I'm anti-slavery today, I might mean something far more broad than what I would mean if I called myself an abolitionist back then. That's kind of like
Hmm.
if I use the word like suffragette to describe myself today. That
Hmm.
seems kind of strange because suffragette was used to describe a set of women who were pushing for very specific legal um, like motives in a
Hmm.
very specific time frame in the late 1800s. So it would make more sense to call myself a feminist because I align with broadly more of the goals under the umbrella of that sphere. Like I don't, it's not like I'm fighting for women to be able to vote or own property today, but I am still advocating for similar motives.
Gotcha. Okay. But is there if you were to write down all the things
Sorry,
you're
I didn't
fighting
answer the rest of your
for,
question.
you're right. Oh, okay, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Like, so what would it be that would make you decide that that was changed?
I don't think I would ever fully abandon the label, much like somebody who, like, if you ask them, like, are you anti slavery? Probably would never abandon that label of being anti slavery. Like, you would probably
Mm,
go on to be like, yeah, like, you would affirm that I'm anti
yeah,
slavery. Yeah. Um,
yeah.
so I probably will never abandon the label fully. But what does my, like, utopic society look like? Like I said, moral, legal, and political and social equality for women. And that means a various amount of things. Like, if you look right now, the amount of sexual, I don't know what kinds of words I can say. Do I have to censor that type of stuff?
You don't have to censor anything.
Like, okay, cool. The amount of like sexual assault that occurs. And that's not just in the United States, that's also overseas, in other countries. I think
Mm,
feminism right now should be advocating for women in Afghanistan. I think one of the most tragic things that's happened where people have just gone ignored is like the women's rights movement in Afghanistan. We've completely abandoned that. I think
mm.
that in the US, at least right now, and this can be disputed, and I'm fine with disputing that and having an open and honest conversation about like the wage gap. I think there's good arguments to be made for a wage gap. There's also something more interesting, and I don't know how much I really want to get into this on this type of podcast. There is actually a sexual advocacy movement for something called the orgasm gap. On average, the stratification we could say between the numbers are abysmal at best. I mean,
Mm.
it's like 9 to 1 or 9 to 2 or something like that for every instance of intercourse. Like a woman. That we don't have to get into all that, but I think there are real things like that. I think women suffering from violence in the United States at a much higher rate than men is an issue that I care about a lot.
Mm.
Yeah, and then the abortion issue is kind of tacked onto that. In some instances, yes, it is a women's rights issue. In some instances, it is a rights conflict issue.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay. So one thing I do want to stay away from, just as far as this conversation and me figuring out if it's needed in the U.S., would be the other elements like the Congo and things mentioned, because I guess I
Sure.
just think it's interesting to look at them separately. One of the reasons is I think people have like somebody yesterday was asking me like why I would care about veganism when there's this and this happening in it might have been something about Gaza, Israel, or something. And part of it is we can affect things that are close to us and that affect us more. Like for example, I would probably spend more time advocating to end male circumcision in the U.S. than trying to figure out how to do anything to advocate for female circumcision abroad, even though I
Right.
think female circumcision is way worse than male circumcision. Because I can vote, I can convince my fellow citizens to vote. And yeah. And
Right.
so I just think it's an interesting topic because clearly there are many issues all over the world, especially issues when it comes to the differences with legal rights for male and female. Um, so I think there's a couple problems. Like, so one thing is, even though there are social issues that I like, I want everybody to be happy and have a good time and everything to work out well. But it's really hard when you're looking at movements to make change to go off of anything like somebody just making a claim about something versus there being things that can be recorded. So, like for example, you made the orgasm comment. Um, Now, at any given time, anybody can make a claim about a thing. Whereas something like the wage gap, if we were to agree that there should be a certain outcome, then we can look at, okay, what would it take for this to be fixed? But anything that just comes down to somebody saying, oh, yeah, when I was in this store, or let's say there's a worker at a store that a male came up to a female worker and or maybe the female worker came up to the male and said, "Hey, can I help you with this computer or whatever?" And then he said something like, "Oh, I don't trust women to know about computers or something like that. Sure, that's not a good thing if I overheard it. Well, I don't know what I would do, but if it was, if I overheard it and it was like my adult son that had said it, I would have a talk in with him. But I don't know if I
Right.
would factor things into knowing if a society has been successful with the movement. So what do you think about that? Do we have to rely on there being an outcome of what people are saying to have met the match for this movement?
Maybe I'm confused on what the question is. Do you mind restating it just so I understand what you're saying?
Yeah. So for example, with the orgasm thing, and I would never personally factor that in, although I think it's an interesting conversation and we should talk about it. I would never factor it in because it's unless there's a study done and we're just seeing how many orgasms happen in this study and there's like electrodes hooked up. It's just going to be like how many people say that this is the outcome. And you could ask a man the question, and because of however he views women in society, can say like, oh yeah, I never orgasm or something, and then you could ask a woman the question and how she views something like I guess I wouldn't factor anything into what I would view as anything I would fight for within feminism as something that we can only know the outcome by trusting what an individual says.
Okay, there's a few things there. Well, one, I mean, social sciences are conducted in this way all the time. To
Okay.
gather data like post elections, when people voted for President Donald Trump, the current administration, what do we do to find out why those people voted for him? Well, we look at like their reasons. They tell us. They tell us, hey, like I
Mm.
voted for him because I care about the economy. I voted for him because I care about the price of eggs, which I actually think is one of the major issues. Like pushing the Republican Party right now. I think that that's the reason is like they're just worried about surviving. But that's how we tell that people are, I mean, we can do those types of studies, and studies like that have been done in their own right. But yes, we have also done surveys like that. If you look into people like John Gottman's work and Jill Gottman, they are both psychologists of relationships, and they actually do that kind of rigorous studies in laboratories where they do hook people up to electrodes and they do study this kind of stuff. Um, but yeah, no, the study or the numbers and statistics that I specifically mentioned was from surveys from both men and women.
Yeah, gotcha. And I think there is something to that. And in some when it comes to some topics, that's kind of all you can do. I guess I just it's
Right.
just complicated to rely on that. But let's talk about that real quick, just because that's such a fascinating topic, and we can get into whatever depths
Sure.
you want to with it. But with the orgasm thing, I guess go ahead and let me know what your thoughts are on it, and then I'll see how I respond to it.
There is, if you've read any work on people who study sex as like a social science,
Hmm.
there's this concept called phallocentrism. And phallocentrism is just the centering of men and their genitals, or males, maybe that would be a more accurate term to use, in sex and in everyday life. Um, and so when you look at like the numbers and the disparities in these numbers, and I'm not saying this is the most important thing that feminism is pushing for, this is just one thing that I think serves as like semi good evidence, is the fact that for
Mm.
so long, especially in the spaces of like intercourse and like talking about those things, we have centered men. Um, some of the biggest like problems in that type of research is finding, pills for erectile dysfunction. A lot of the research in that is not about okay, women having pain during sex or women orgasming during sex, and that's evidence in the statistics that we have on that type of thing.
Mm.
There's
Okay.
also an interesting set of evidence that goes to if you look at respondents who are of any gender identity and any sexual orientation, the
Hmm.
closer that something gets to um, being like phallic, the more likely someone is to consider that thing sex. And then the more likely someone is to consider something sex is directly correlated with the times that they've had like an orgasm. Um, so you can look
Mm.
at like, if you ask a lesbian woman, hey, do you consider like oral sex sex? they would be less likely to consider that sex if they had not used something like a toy or like a dildo or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
there's even those disparities with people who don't even like men. So
Yeah.
and it gets more and more like the percentages go up and up, the more that you kind of shift that over to like straight men and then gay men.
Do you think that's a problem? The just like what somebody defines as sex and it being that.
I think, and I'll take this quote from Dr. Jenny Stuber, who's a wonderful faculty member and professor at my university, who teaches a class on this. I think sex is socially defined and motivated. People have reasons for why they want to define something as sex. And so I think that
Mm.
that's evidence in the way that people describe what they consider to be sex. So if somebody does like have this notion of like centering men or prioritizing men over women, they'll be more likely to call something sex or validate it in a sense if it involves a man versus if it only involves two women or two females.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is so interesting. Okay, because I don't know if I would consider the idea of the lesbian saying that they would only describe it as sex if there was like an object entering. I don't know if I would view that as revolving around men just because that's what the object is similar to. I think it's more to do with if somebody views the idea of like sex needing to involve penetration. Um, yeah, huh, that's interesting.
Right. And then the question becomes, well, why does it need to involve penetration? What is the reason? And, I mean, the explanation could be, well, it just mimics reproduction. But if we can use the
Mhm.
argument that, well, it just mimics this other thing, well, why can't we use that argument for well, it just mimics, something phallic. So therefore it is centering that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and yeah, I guess anybody can have it. I don't know. Words evolve. Any word can have any definition, and whatever the majority cling on to is what we go with. Like to me, if the definition of sex was just penis and vagina, that's it, and then everything
Right.
else is other things. That's fine. If somebody
Yeah.
asks a lesbian or a gay person like, "Oh, do you have sex?" then they would go, "Oh no, I'm gay. I don't have sex. I have this other thing or whatever."
Yeah.
And I don't think there's necessarily a problem with that. We just figure out why a definition for a word is the best one, and then we go with it. Do you have a thought
Right.
on?
And I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I think there might be a lag. So like if you take a pause and I like interrupt, that's because I'm like really excited to talk about the thing that we're talking about.
Yeah, you're fine. I think there
So
is a lag, but yeah, you're fine.
okay, cool. Um, yeah, well, my reason for pointing that out wasn't to say people are wrong for using the definitions that they use. It's just to say that they're motivated and that display of motivation of what their intent is a display of like, okay, well, this concept of phallocentrism might be true and might have real world impacts. And then we can get into more of the real world impacts. I think stuff like that affects like sexual assault reports. I think it affects a lot.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, here's a question I have for you. One, it's separate from what we were just talking about, but it's about the orgasm thing. Let's say uh, we uh, we ask 100 random strangers that happen to we find 100 random strangers that just had sex within the past week. And in some of the cases, it's somebody that they just dated a couple times. In other cases, it's a one night stand. It doesn't really matter. And the age range could be from like 15 to I don't know, 50. We ask 100 people, and all the men say that they orgasmed, and all the women say that they didn't. Let's just say all, just for the sake of this. Um, do you think there's a problem there, and do you think that problem is men?
Do I think the problem is necessarily men? No. Do I
Okay.
think the problem could be the way that both men and women have been socialized? Yes.
Okay. So I guess I'll just share my thought on what I would think the problem is, because for whatever reason I thought about this a little bit. Um, I think people in general, I mean, depending on their personality, they find certain topics awkward to talk about, and that's a social thing. Like that would depend on the society whether it just is thought of as awkward or not. And especially the younger somebody is, the less likely they are to either male or female to say like, hey, what do you like or what feels good? Or telling the person, hey, can you do this to me because this feels good? And so if males just happen to exist in a way where it takes nothing for them to orgasm, and if females happen to exist in a way where it takes something for them too, and if neither person talks to each other, and like, I guess what I'm saying is if the male orgasms and the female does not, the male could want nothing more than that female to be happy, but they're too awkward and nervous to ask or to even know that they need to or think to, especially the younger they are, like high school age. They might just naturally think, oh, the my body does this thing so easily, it takes nothing to do it, and their body probably does an easy thing and it takes nothing to do it. And that's just their thought process. And then the female might be thinking like, oh, I heard this is fun, but it's actually not fun. But I'm going to keep doing it because I think this person likes it and I like this person. I've heard people talk as if there is a problem because of males for this reason. And I think it's important to figure out what exactly the problem is. And it seems so often that it is males judged for it when maybe it needs to be more of a thing where somehow within society, people just encourage others to talk with the person that they're having that action with. Because would you agree that the problem is the communication and the problem isn't the fact that somebody is born with the easy ability to orgasm?
Yeah, no, the problem is not biology. The problem is
Mm.
communication. There's actually interesting statistics. That gap, the disparity there, closes the older you get. And it closes, I believe,
Mhm.
more so if you're married. So over time, people who probably communicate more, who see each other on a more frequent basis, and who are engaging in intercourse on a more frequent basis, are probably having, better experiences, but also that orgasm gap in percentage closes a lot more. So it is a communication thing, and it is largely social. And I think you brought up a really interesting point that I think that um, women are socialized to just please men and kind of go along with it. To just kind of like, if it's not good, they can just wait it out and it'll be fine. And, as long as it gets, things get done, then that's it. And I think that's why largely we see those like disparities. And like I said, this isn't the most important issue, affecting feminism, but I think it is kind of an addendum, at least in part.
Yeah. Well, so I want to point out that I didn't mean to say that I think women are socialized to please men. My example of that was just like in her mind, because I mean, I don't know about you, and I don't know about most men and most women. I won't get too graphic or into anything detailed, but like when it comes to that topic in my mind, I would say 90% of anything I care about is just like I'm a people pleaser. I just like to help people with things. I like to help the neighbors with their yard work. And so I just when it comes to that topic, I just would like want somebody to be happy or whatever. And I think I don't know if that's like a higher trait within females, but my example was just like it might just be in her mind, like we do things that we love to do, but we also do things that maybe we don't love to do because it's nice for somebody else or whatever. So in this one random example, a woman might be, or in this case, it's probably a younger person, maybe a teenager or whatever, might think, oh, okay, like I don't necessarily like this thing. I don't dislike it, but I like this person and I'll do this thing. But then also like on a different day, she might talk him into going to I don't know what a women like a ballet performance or something, and she knows that he's not too into that, but he does it anyways. So it could be a thing where females are socialized to try to please men. I'm not convinced of that. I think in general people like to please each other, and there are limits that people are willing to go to do things that they have no interest in to please the people they care about. Do you think? And this is the type of thing that I have a hard time with, like this vague idea of we're socialized to think this, when it could just be a natural thing. Like people will talk about girls being socialized to think like they need to look like the models in the magazines and all these different things. And I don't know if that kind of thing is fair to say. I think it's whether you just see somebody in your town or at school that you think looks a certain way and people like them and therefore you want your body to look like that, or if you see a magazine or a movie. I don't think it's fair to say that because even in large numbers people are making certain choices that they're socialized to. Maybe you could speak on that more. Like what makes you feel like you are convinced that females are socialized to please men?
Well, we can look at like there's a few different things. And I think largely one of these things is kind of a sign that feminism, at least in the way that I desire it to work and the way that I think that a lot of people desire it to work, is working. We can take the divorce rates over time. One might look at like the divorce rates and go, oh, if the divorce rates are going up, that's a really bad thing. Like we need to fix something in society. Something in society is really wrong here. Something is off. Maybe marriages are unhappy. And that's not necessarily true. The divorce rate going up might be something good because women have been able to be divorced. I brought up no fault divorce earlier. That actually used to be illegal. No fault divorce used to be legal in the United States, point blank, period. Over time, that's been repealed. There have been changes in law to allow women to divorce their husbands. And so it's quite obvious that, these women who were in abusive situations that might have been hard to prove, because quite frequently it is a hard thing to prove that abuse is happening. If it's not, like the extreme cases where you see where the wife ends up getting murdered. So something like that might be like kind of a sign that, hey, like, even though divorce is not a good thing, no one wants divorce. It might be a better outcome than staying, being forced legally to stay in that type of relationship. So that's one. If you're looking for something like tangible evidence that you can grab onto and go, okay, this is something good that I think like modern feminism is doing. I think that's one, like a good thing to do. Is I think that what's happened is we've now started to socialize women away from having to feel like they have to please men and more to like seeking their own paths in life and speaking up for themselves and speaking out for themselves, like in the Me Too movement. So that might be something you can hold on to and go like, oh, okay, this is evidence that like we are socialized in a particular way. And sometimes that socialization plays itself out into law. And then we have laws like that. And I think there's other things you can look at. If you're just looking for evidence that people are socialized in gendered ways, or in ways that maybe like promote really bad outcomes, you can look at, there's a study that's done by sociologist Martha Burt, that I've known for a while about this particular study, that men on college campuses who hold what we call rape myths, like myths about rape, about how much blame the victim has or how guilty the victim should be, or, the victim's causal role in the action occurring, or her deservedness of it occurring even. Men who hold more beliefs about that are more likely to commit violent and aggressive acts against women. So I think that's something, if you're looking for something like tangible evidence that we are socialized in these particular ways, there's also evidence of, anthropologists have done a really good job studying this. There was a uncontacted tribe where the young girls living on this island or in this area where they were living had never seen American television before. And the beauty standard within that tribe was to be fat. Like that was the beauty standard because it was a sign of healthiness. It was a sign of prosperity. And so when they were first introduced to American television, the rates of eating disorders actually started to go up in this society, in this tribe. So there is evidence that by being introduced to specific things and seeing these different things, like we are socialized in particular ways where we treat others differently. And sometimes that plays out in law, sometimes that plays out in mental health issues, and sometimes it plays out in crime.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to figure out if these things. I'm trying to figure out if I would consider some of these things socialized, and then also would I consider these socialized things bad? Um, if people in some tribe had all the options for colors of garments, and they all like the most liked by males were green and females were blue or something like that. And then they were introduced to TV, and then they see these people wearing these other colors. And then all of a sudden, because of this, now the favorite color is orange. I don't view this as a bad thing. People see things, they like it, they do the thing. I don't know if something becomes bad when it's a bad outcome, or if something becomes bad when it's pressured and then that takes place. Because obviously, I don't think you can have a bad outcome with somebody's favorite color changing if you're socialized to have a favorite color change. Even if your favorite color would have naturally been a certain thing, you existing in an area, you're going to want to do what people are doing in that area. And I don't think of it as necessarily a bad thing. So, for example, I had a discussion yesterday with somebody about trans issues, and the person asked me like if I as a male started growing boobs, would I want those removed? And I said yes, I would want those removed because it's one of the things that I could imagine I would feel in the society I'm in. I wouldn't feel good existing as a male with that. But if I, the exact same person, grew up in a society where every male and female had boobs and they were equal sized boobs, and then I grew those boobs, I don't think I would think for 1 second, I want these removed. It would just be a type of thing where everybody had them, so I'd feel weird if I didn't, because there are certain things that we want or we go along with just because of our society, and I don't view those things as bad things. The question, the when it becomes bad is when you're doing something you don't want to do because you're feeling pressured, and I think it's really hard to figure out where that's taking place. And so I know I've been rambling a bit, but the thing I meant to get to would be something like, for myself, and I think this is maybe leaning towards being a male thing, but it might be just both male and female. Like, I like to fix things. I love it when somebody I care about like needs, like, I don't know, maybe like a certain knot tied in a thing to make this like certain object work right, that they can't figure out how to like attach something to this like backpack or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I have this idea. And then I feel accomplished if I can help people. I really like doing that. And I think that's a thing that, that maybe more often males like to do. And when I'm at a grocery store, if I overhear somebody saying that they're looking for a certain object, I kind of want to go out of my time or my way and like waste my time to help this person find this object. And I don't even work at the store. And I think some people could say, oh, well, men are socialized to want to help people and they shouldn't have to want to help people. So let's figure out a way to not make them socialized for that. But I really think that some people, and it doesn't matter if it's male or female, want to help people, and that's that. And then some people want to please people or whatever. So when we're talking about the females being socialized to please men, I guess I would need to see something that would make me feel like that's a bad thing. I think it's good to please people in general, unless you're doing something you don't want to do. So I'll stop rambling. But does that make sense? Like, does it matter if it's socialized or not socialized if somebody wants to do a certain thing?
Sure. So, what I could have given you initially was just the rate of male orgasm. And then that would have told you nothing about what is bad that's going on. Because obviously my goal isn't like to make men orgasm less, which we can talk about the difference between like I actually have suspicions about this data somewhat being off because I don't think that
Mm,
people know the difference between ejaculation and orgasm. I think that there's
mm,
studies that need to be done on that. But regardless,
mhm,
I could have given you that, and then that would have told us nothing about like what the issue is. The issue is the disparity, right? Because that's why, well, I didn't give you specific numbers, and I can pull those up if need be, but the disparities, I believe, are something like 9 to 1. It's like a huge gap.
mhm.
Um, but we
Why is that
can
an issue?
look at that, and the issue is that people are pleasing others at the expense of themselves. Obviously, if you ask your average woman, like, "Hey, would it be like good if you orgasmed more during sex?" Like, they're going to be like, "Yeah, that would be great. Like, that's what I'm working towards."
Mm,
And when you think about it, like, okay, well, what's the sign of like, the healthy relationships that we look at? Like, why is it a good thing that like over time when someone's in a relationship, they're having more orgasms and they're having more fulfilling sex with their partner? Well, that's a good thing because people are communicating, and that's a good thing because people are actually having their desires fulfilled versus not having their desires fulfilled, pre-relationship or otherwise. So the problem is doing something at the expense of their own self and their own well-being. um, and then I think that that type of thing, that like phallocentric view of like how sex should work, like I should work to, if this is sex, it must have, like vaginal, like penile vaginal intercourse, what we call PVI.
mhm.
It must be this thing, and it must end in this particular way. Like most people consider sex more if the male finishes, versus like if the female finishes alone.
What do you mean by
So
most
there
people
is
think that?
there's statistics on it where like if you ask people like would you be more likely to consider something sex if like the male finished, they would say yes. Does that make
But
sense?
those same people would say, if a man and a woman were having sex and the female orgasm, but the man couldn't, would you call that sex? And they would say no.
I'd have to look at the numbers, but I do think it is a lower rate.
That's wild.
It's a lower rate than what they would say for the inverse.
It just sounds like it must be trolls or something. You know. I mean, obviously, it's just somebody being asked.
No, this
Being
is how
called a troll
people
means
think.
nothing, but
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
wild.
no, this is what people think. It was very interesting. One of the most jarring was about the lesbians who like consider it sex more if there's like a dildo involved, which I'm like, you're a lesbian, you don't even like men, like that's crazy. But I do think that that
Hmm.
itself is a kind of like note on the fact that we do act in these ways. We do act in ways that are prioritizing men, at least sexually, over women, and then that prioritization leads to more research on erectile dysfunction, less research on oh the term is slipping my mind, endometriosis, things like that, on women's
Hmm.
reproductive organs and on women's sexual health than there is
Hmm.
the
Gotcha.
inverse.
Okay. Well, I can't stop thinking about the fact that I want to watch a psychologist talk to any lesbian that would consider an object going in as sex, but not part of their own body, so like a finger or something. Because that if that
Well,
were
this
the
is
claim, that's outrageous. Um,
yeah,
and
yeah. I think upon reflection, you might be able to convince those people that like, hey, that's kind of like a silly usage of the word. Like maybe you don't
yeah,
actually think that, but I think it is kind of like people go off heuristics all the time. Like people,
hmm
I think people very rarely think about like what they actually think sex is. I think they very rarely like fully consciously think about these things. So these are just kind of their heuristics for going about the world, at least.
gotcha. Okay, well let's take it to like kind of an extreme to see if there's a wrong action here. So let's say that you just have a male and a female. They start dating, and let's let's say that this male just like doesn't care about if she orgasms. Okay, like this person just doesn't have interest in it. So I'm trying to think of something I don't have interest in. I have no interest in watching reality dating shows. Um, if my wife or a friend tries to get me to like watch something or listen to something, I'll be open minded to check most things out. But I've seen enough, like two reality dating shows, to know that I never want to watch one again. So it's just something I wouldn't do. I don't think it's wrong of me to not want to do that. So I think anything that anybody wants to not do isn't wrong of them. But when it comes to being in a relationship, and especially being in like a long-term relationship, getting married, so you're like declaring you're going to spend the rest of your life with somebody, it's good to know each other well enough before that happens. But if a male just says like, hey, you know what, I think I'm a good person, I'm good in all these different areas, I care about my partner more than anything, but for some reason I just have no care if they orgasm. And if that's something that bothers them, then I guess the relationship has to end or whatever. Do you think that's bad of a person to just have no interest in that? I'm trying to figure out a good way to word it because it sounds like it's hard to make that be a case, but I just think anybody can feel how they want about what they want to do, and then they can want to be in a relationship with somebody, and as long as that person wants to be in that relationship too, anything is probably fine, right?
Um, Probably fine kind of seems to boil it down a little bit. Like it might, if by fine you mean the relationship will probably work out and be successful, then yeah, I mean, look, if we look at like relationships that are successful and then look at the orgasm gap rate, then yeah, that happens all the time where like there is likely not at all. Well, there might be no prioritization or no care given to that issue. Or it just might be that like it's not an issue and neither party really cares. So yeah, that thing happens all the time. So if you mean that like, is it okay by like, will it lead to a successful relationship, or do you mean is there something like morally bad there, or
Like
is there something
what I
else you're
mean
getting at?
is, like, would you point out to a wrong thing in society if it happened? Like, so for example, if my wife woke up tomorrow and just decided she was asexual, it doesn't matter how much I love
Mm.
sex. This is a person I love and I want to spend the rest of my life with. So anything like that is not going to impact my wanting to spend the rest of my life with her. I'm not saying that it shouldn't impact others. Everybody can live their lives how they want. But that's how I feel. If tomorrow, let's say every male adult, we'll just say every male woke up asexual, and they also were all willing to donate sperm to keep human existence going, but they were asexual, and their preference would be to never have sex again. And maybe some of them would entertain the wants of their partners that happen to be female, but let's say almost all of them said that they would rather not. They'd rather that person take care of their own stuff in that manner. And aside from being asexual and just not wanting to partake in anything sexual, everything else about their lives were fine. Would you think that these attitudes are bad for society, and like not? Would you think that the morally right thing to do would be to encourage these people to continue to do sexual acts even if it's kind of bothersome to them?
No. If maybe if I'm understanding the question correctly, was the question if all men tomorrow, like nothing else about their life changed, they just suddenly became asexual, would it be wrong to encourage them to have sex anyways?
Um, or would it be right to encourage, or what would you think of that? If they woke up like that, would there be an action that these men do based on waking up like that would make you feel that there's an issue in society, a change that should happen?
I think maybe there's a lag or something because I you kind of cut out and I barely heard the second half of that sentence.
Yeah. So all men wake up feeling this way, and they have no interest in sex. And let's just say that they pretty much all just don't do it anymore. They don't mean anything negative by it. They just like they that badly don't want it. Would you factor that in to how you view feminism? Would you say that there's an issue here with these men that feel this way? They need to step up to the plate and perform these things even if they feel this way.
Oh no. Um, Now I might look at what the cause was.
Hmm.
Just on its face, though, I would say no. Now, if there was some cause, like um, maybe something in the water just made all men asexual, I might look into that and go like, hey,
Hmm.
actually, like these people, like they might have more fulfilling lives if they can go back to like not being asexual. So there
Hmm.
might be something there, but I would be more concerned with the. Oh,
Oh,
it looked like it
you.
just like the screen went black for me, and then
Yeah, there's a good lag on you. I don't know if it's a like an internet service type thing or what, but it's okay.
is it
That
fixed now?
was yeah, it's fixed now.
Okay, okay.
There's been a
Um,
little delay here and there, but mostly that was the only time that it was like a big lag. But
oh
I heard
yeah,
everything you said.
okay, cool. Yeah, it just like cut off. Screen went black
Oh,
completely. Um,
gotcha.
yeah, no, I think that my concern would be the cause there. If the cause is something malicious, like maybe I don't know, some evil woman poisoned the water and like made all of these men this way against their will, like yeah, I'd be concerned with that. Um, but I'm not sure. I have much concern with that. Is the concern maybe that they're not focused on pleasing women? Because the goal isn't to just have men please women and that be it. The goal is
Hmm.
to close the gap because, like you said, people are social creatures. People like to please each other. But
Hmm.
if that were really true, at least in the case of intercourse between men and women, you would see a lot more effort on men's side, which I don't suspect that you do see effort as much. Because, like you said,
Hmm.
like you brought up the case of like, okay, think of like somebody who's maybe a teen or in their early 20s, and they're kind of having sex for the first time, and or maybe the first few times or something like that, and they're like, oh, you know what? It's easy for me. It's not easy for her, so I guess like I'm just gonna finish and that'll be it. Um, I think that if they really, really cared about women in that way, that gap would be a lot less significant.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
I think
So
it is a socialization issue.
gotcha. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So the reason I brought that up is because I'm trying to go to an extreme. If this thing took place, are we viewing this as a wrong thing? And if we're not viewing it as a wrong thing, it's hard for me to view anything in that regard as a wrong thing. Individuals will act how they want. Every individual adult, male or female, they'll act how they want, and then the outcome will lead them to deciding their choices. If a female's having sex with a male and not enjoying herself, she could either put up with it and continue, or she might break up with that person, and then that will have an impact. If he's not aware of why she broke up with him, then he might not learn from it. But we're each doing the things that we want to do, and so that's why I view it as hard to view it as a socialization issue. Um, but I would say it seems like most people enjoy pleasing people. And, people like to dress a certain way to try to attract people. People like to go on dates with people. Anybody that's like going on dates, having sex, wanting to get married, all these different things, they're wanting something like a partner. They're wanting to please somebody. They're wanting to do things for people. So I would guess more so than there being a socialization problem where men are socialized to not please women sexually, or where women are socialized to sacrifice their wants and needs or whatever. I would say more so that there's just the lack of communication. And I don't think that's a socialized thing. I think a female not having that conversation saying, hey, can you do this? Or hey, I like this. I don't think there's reason to believe that that's a socialized thing because I just like where is that? What's happening that would make us think that? Because if there was something, then we could fight for it. But just claiming that it's happening makes it to where there's nothing exactly to fight for. If that makes sense.
So when you say, okay, you said something along the lines, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm not kind of quoting you adequate or accurately. You said something like language, like it seems like communication thing isn't socialization. Maybe I'm confused what you mean by there, because to me, when I talk about communication, communication is a social tool, and we learn our communication from the
Mm.
people around us and how we're raised in our environment. So, what do you mean communication isn't a socialization thing?
No, that's a good point, and you're completely right, and I was wrong. Um, I,
Okay, okay,
I,
fine. Okay,
no,
cool.
no, no, you're good. I just, I'm trying to work this all out, and words are complicated, and I was loading socialization with with more so of a malicious intent, um, like that there's people in a society that are trying to hold people down, so they're spreading this information that will lead women to not speak up and say what they want or whatever. I just think so. I agree with you. If when people are raised by their parents or whoever, that sure there will be a different outcome if somebody raises somebody encouraging them to speak up, be open minded, like uh, share what you want when you're talking with people. And there will be some of that to it. I think also people kind of just have their natural personality of somebody that's super shy isn't going to be parented out of their shyness completely. There's going to be elements of biology there. I just, I just, I just think that it's makes more sense to think any issue that most issues in this like orgasm thing we're talking about, that most issues just come down to individuals not communicating, and that I would say that when the topic is talked about, the only thing that makes sense to me would be encouraging communication. It wouldn't be anything to do with, like, it doesn't matter how many men are orgasm or women are. I think clearly, would you agree with me that those numbers are more so to do with biology than socialization, right? Like if women orgasmed as easy as men without, like, men don't need to have conversations to figure out how to orgasm. They just it'll happen almost no matter what. If that were the case with women, if they were designed to orgasm as quickly and as often and as easily without conversation, there wouldn't be an issue here, right? It would just be both would be orgasming every time, right?
Um, if your question, oh, sorry, you cut out. If your question is about whether or not people should just communicate more and if that's the way to solve the issue, yeah, that would be the way to solve the issue. We can actually look, because I really want to press the point that the issue is a gendered one. It is a, well, or sexed one, whichever way you want to word that. I'm fine with using those interchangeably for the purpose of this conversation because I think it's obvious what I mean.
Yeah, same.
But when you look at people, yeah, like women in um, like lesbian relationships or homosexual relationships, often find that there is a higher level. So it's interesting that like the issue does appear to be gendered. The issue does appear to be rooted in the way that we talk to each other and the way that we socialize each other. And I'm not denying that there's no biological link there. I just think that it's interesting that that biological link somehow gets lessened over time. That to me shows like a significant social impact. And because communication is social.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because the social element, the conversations, which is why as people get older, like you've said, that there's less likely to have that issue because they are communicating, but it doesn't change the biology of it. Like the biology must be what's getting in the way here of this, because if it took the same detail to make males orgasm the way it takes females, then the conversation would just be about how people should communicate to make both happen. Where if both happen the way it currently happens with males, then there would be no communication needed at all. So we're just trying to figure out how to get humans to communicate to get this outcome for the sex that happens to, well, I'll say gender because we're talking about the action of sex, to make the gender that has a more complicated approach to an end goal, we're trying to get that same end goal. So does that make sense? Like I don't know if I'm wording this right.
Yeah, there is some biological aspect to it. I'm not actually fully convinced. There's, like I said, there's issues with the data there. One, I do have qualms with the data possibly being skewed because I don't think that men and women both understand the difference between an orgasm and ejaculation. I think those are two separate things, and that people often just conflate them. And the way
Mhm.
that they talk about them is just in the way that they talk about male ejaculation being an orgasm, like they call that thing that. So the
Mhm.
data is possibly skewed, and I actually have a high suspicion that it's skewed. The other thing is that that itself should be kind of like a clue that the way that we talk about sex is centering to men, because we have quite literally equivocated the word with that. Like we have equivocated the word orgasm with male ejaculation in that particular sphere where you ask people like you ask males like, hey, did you orgasm last time you had sex? And then when they say yes, what they really mean is probably just that they ejaculated. They don't actually mean like I had an orgasm. So that might
Mm.
be one kind of thing that points to, well, we are prioritizing largely at large, because that's the study. Like if you, I'm a sociology minor, so a lot of what I study is sociology and the way that people interact with each other, um, and then what those outcomes mean. So part of that is like, okay, well, we can look at the individuals, and there is something to be said there about how vastly different people's experiences are. But that connection of like, okay, well, now we're starting to see patterns in society. We're seeing things where, like, when communication changes, outcomes change. When the way that men talk about women changes, their outcomes and their actions towards women changes. And that's both in intercourse and in violence statistics and all sorts of
Mm.
things.
Okay. Okay, well, let me ask a couple questions. So, for one, if communication changed to where everybody was communicating, but for some reason there was still the same outcome, I do not think this would be the case. But if it was, if we questioned everybody, everybody says orgasms, and there's the 9 to 1 like you're talking about. Let's say that we knew everybody was communicating and everybody was trying their darndest, and the outcome just stayed 9 to 1. Would you say would you say that there is an issue that needs fixed?
The well, the issue is an issue if people care. Um, I don't believe in issues that exist outside of people. It's kind
Okay.
of like asking, like, okay, well, if I throw a knife up into the air, is that an issue? Well, it's only an issue if someone gets hit. Um,
Yeah.
that's the problem. So if no females cared about it, like if they were just like, no, we're just fine. We all communicate. I orgasm when I want to, and when I don't, I don't. Like, yeah, of course there wouldn't be an issue. Um, at least not that I think. Or that if there was an issue and people did care about it and people did want something to change, because I think it overall is good, and I suspect that that's the way it would map onto reality, is that people enjoy pleasurable sex. Um, the shift
Mhm.
would just move to more of a biological one, because it is partially a biological one. It is partially that the way that we talk about like female orgasms is kind of like dismissive, and that people don't like care too much, or they don't. There's people who don't think it's possible. So there is issues there, but yeah, it would just shift the lens, kind of like um, I don't, and I'll take this term also from one of my professors. It's not about the way that like people have this conversation where it's like, oh, it's just men's nature or women's nature versus nurture. Well, no, it's not really that. It's the way that your nature is nurtured. So it's the way that you take your biological predispositions and then they're socialized. But if you weed out that socialization, all you're left with is the biology. So of course the lens would focus then onto the biology of it, if it is considered a problem still.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, interesting. Yeah, and this I really enjoyed that conversation. I think I want to think about it more, and then maybe we can revisit it at some point. And I wrote down the name of the author you're talking about and the book that she wrote. But let's go ahead before we get to abortion. Let's hop over to one more topic just within feminism. Maybe something that is less.
Oh, I think you cut it.
Oh,
You cut out for like a full sentence and a half. I did not hear what you said. It
oh,
just
it's
like
okay.
jumped to you saying something completely different.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry. I was just going to say before we talk about abortion, which I want to do here in a second, I want to hop over to one more topic really quick of something that you think is important within feminism, but maybe less so. Something that would just be people saying their wants, something that could be more so factually known. Um, or you mentioned the wage gap. We could go there.
You're still cut. You're. I'm so sorry. You're still cutting out. So
Yeah,
I missed. I think a lot of that.
you're fine.
Something went on.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I wonder. I wish I knew. It seems my internet's perfectly fine. Um, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Hmm.
Everything's good now. Okay. I was just curious to.
Yeah.
I don't know if you said it in this talk or if it was me hearing you debate somebody, but part of how you view feminism is equal opportunity. And so I want to kind of figure out what you mean by opportunity. Um, and let's look at you. You mentioned like the wage gap. Do you do you think how do you view the wage gap?
I wish I was more well versed on the arguments for and against it. Um, I think that there is something that. Oh, okay, cut out for me again. I hope it's catching up now. Um, I think there is something to be said about historically there being a wage gap. And since then, laws have changed over time. Now, does that mean that it's fully been mitigated? I actually am not 100% sure, but from the last time that I've looked at the statistics, which was forever ago, I don't talk about feminism a lot, at least not into this depth. Um, but I will say that there is a small possibility that there still does exist a wage gap. And by wage gap, I don't mean men overall make more than women. By wage gap, I mean that I believe that statistically there probably is some gap per position that each um, sex has, like a gap, if that makes sense. Sorry.
Mhm. Yeah, you're fine. Yeah. Okay, so let's strip it down. Let's say we're in this tiny society. There's 1,000 people, and we'll just have it be okay. Person A grows a bunch of carrots, and they sell these carrots to people in this society of 1,000 people, and they decide that they want to hire somebody to work for them. Do you think there should be any obligations that person A hires needs to fit any quota? If they hire 4 people, does it matter if they're all male or all female?
Now, that I'm not exactly sure. I would probably say no, no, not legally. There is, how do I explain this? I would not be against somebody doing that. I would be against the government regulating someone to do that. Now, I think that person probably should hire females. I think they probably should hire like equally, but legally, no. And I hear this brought up in like conversations about affirmative action and like DEI a lot. And I think people have some confusion there about what that actually means. But
Mhm. Yeah, I'm not trying to sneak anything in. I'm just trying to I like to break things down into small. Okay, so yeah, and I agree. So if it doesn't matter if it's a female hiring 4 females or a female hiring 4 males, a male hiring 4 females. If somebody's growing carrots and they need help pulling those carrots out, who they hire means nothing to me. Um, and so I just think that's an interesting element to look at. Now, let's say they hire 2 males and 2 females, and for whatever reason they want to pay. We can go the other direction just to make things more complicated. Let's say that they want to pay the females $1 an hour, but they only want to pay the males 50 cents an hour. The person grew these carrots. They are offering these people jobs, and they're saying what they want to pay them. Do you think that there should be a law as long as they're all getting paid minimum wage? If we're gonna, let's just assume there's a minimum wage, and in this case, it must be 50 cents or less. Um, do you think that a law should say, unless you can explain very well why they're doing slightly different jobs than each other, that you must either pay all of them only 50 cents or all of them $1?
Okay, sorry. I'm trying to make sure I caught everything because I it is still kind of laggy. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Like, have I cut out at all?
Yeah, you cut out here and there. I have a
Yeah, I
feeling
have been
that
cutting out.
something's happening with your internet connection. Some people in chat are saying that
Might
that
be.
you're kind of scrambled to them a little bit here and there. I mean, not through the whole thing, but that they're saying that
It's weird.
I'm not cutting out at all. So I don't know if there's a way to like disconnect to
Okay.
your internet and then reconnect. But I also, as
Weird.
long as you can get the basic idea, I don't mind. The conversation's fine
I
as
hear
is.
you
I
now.
feel bad
Okay.
that, oh, okay. But
Cool.
yeah, so did you get the whole question though about the 50 cents and the dollar?
Right. Yeah. If the question is just regarding should we have a law that says like, hey, you must pay all your employees equally regardless of gender, and we can even extend that regardless of race, regardless of sexual orientation, whatever. Yeah, I think that that would probably be fine. That would probably hinge on some like empirical data about like what would happen. Like, okay, well, in this hypothetical world, if people paid everybody equally, would everyone in would society fall apart and things would just catch on fire and babies of would die of cancer? Well, of course, no. Then we shouldn't have that law. So it would hinge on some like empirical data about how that would play out. But generally, I think probably that would be a good idea. And I think that we do have laws like that. Like you can't like pay your black employee like slightly less than your white employee.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely don't think, like, obviously, I guess not obviously, because there are sexist and racist people in the world. I don't think anybody should be treated any kind of poorly based on their race, gender, any sexual orientation, any of that stuff. But I do like looking at and testing the limits of what people should be allowed to do. I lean kind of libertarian. I think everybody having their freedoms for the most part is really good. So it is kind of complicated. Like part of me thinks that like if some restaurant wants to be racist and say no black people can come in, it's like they're just going to fail as a business. They can just lose all this business, and they'll even lose white business because all the good white people that aren't racist will say I won't support that store. And so part of me thinks that that this is everybody should just have the freedom to do anything they want to do that isn't harming somebody. I think when it came to wearing masks in 2020, that one store could say you can't come in without a mask, while another store can say you can't come in with a mask or whatever. And then people can just decide which store they want to go to based on these reasons. But part of me just wants this freedom. But I do also recognize that sometimes a government has to step in and remove that freedom if entire states are forcing people of certain skin colors to not be able to use certain bathrooms and that kind of thing. So it does become complicated. But what's important to me is I don't think the outcomes matter. And so, from my understanding, the wage gap is more of an outcome thing where uh, any difference within wage for the most part is just based on who's making what money. If a man's working like 80-hour shifts, 80 hours a week as a lawyer, and females that are lawyers are only working like 30 hours or whatever, and then we have a final outcome, then it's like we see this disparity in the outcome. I haven't been convinced that there's any stats that show that there's a problem with the opportunity. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Okay. I mean, the only thing I can kind of say on that is that the outcome is probably evidence of the opportunity, at least in this case. We've seen that like historically, like there's a reason why there's not, that historically there haven't been women in STEM fields. It's not just coincidence that like women just didn't, they just weren't interested in science. Women
Mhm.
have been interested in science, and women have been interested in biology and mathematics and all sorts of different fields and engineering. And the opportunity wasn't afforded, whether or not that be legally or whether or not that just be socially. I think that we see this in a lot of other scenarios, and sometimes these social policies are more in your face, and sometimes they're not. And I think that, you can say you don't care about the outcome. I think to say that I believe in feminism that cares more about equality of opportunity is because a lot of the times I care about the outcome, but the
Mm.
outcome is not what I believe should be guaranteed. I think it's a good thing to work towards, but I think that the goal should be the opportunity. Because what I don't want is 50-50 female and male lawyers. I don't want 50-50 female and male doctors or whatever. I want the people who want to do those things to choose those jobs and to do so without coercion or without,
Mhm.
feeling like they're ostracized for doing those things or without, whatever, or without being paid less to do them.
Gotcha. So, what takes place in the U.S. that makes you feel that that's not the case? Because we have the laws already there. You like legally, women can become doctors, and many of doctors are women. Um, is it just the idea that you can hear stories if enough women announce like, "Oh, I want to be a doctor," and I interviewed here, but I'm pretty sure this hospital is sexist, and like I guess that's my biggest problem is as long as the laws are there, I feel like the opportunity that like the law makes the opportunity. If it's like we were talking about with the carrot thing. If some people can hire whoever they want to hire, and that doesn't change the opportunity, if a person that's hiring people to work with the carrots only hires males in this society, still a female can grow carrots, and a female can hire females, and other males can hire females. So even if a female doctor went to a hospital and wanted a job, and the person said, "Oh no, we don't want to hire females at all." Let's say they didn't hide their sexism. I think we you already agreed that that's fine. And so I just don't see where there isn't the opportunity as long as it's fine for somebody to not hire based on sex, whether it's male or female. Or did you only agree to that in the weird carrot situation, but you wouldn't
Right.
agree to it in the US?
Oh, okay. You cut out again. That might be me, but I will take what I've heard and kind of respond to it.
Yeah.
Um, there was kind of one question about like what type of thing, if not legally, do you think is going on? And then there was a second question or a statement made about what I agreed was the word you used was fine. Um, Now, I don't think it's fine if someone goes, I don't want to hire women or I don't want to hire Black people. I don't think that's
Mm.
morally fine. I
Hmm.
think that's bad. I think that people shouldn't do that. I think that people should want to hire women. I think people should want to hire Black people. I think they should want. Um, Legally, should they be obligated to meet a quota? No. And historically, people typically aren't fighting for that in any field. Um, but I will say the other kind of statement about what's kind of going on socially, because that's what I care about. And I made this statement to Andrew when I talked to him about how I consider myself, at least as a modern feminist, to be something called a critical feminist, where I'm very critical of the way that societies treat women, or at least my society treats women, and then what we should do about that and how that plays out in everyday scenarios and in everyday life. And that doesn't mean that my entire opinions are going to be all based off of anecdotes from different women about them not being hired for jobs. A lot of my opinions do come from statistics. So the whole framework is kind of mirroring in a way what people have done with critical race theory, where they've taken critical feminism as a theory and kind of shaped it to the needs of the society that they exist in. So the question about how does that work? Like what's happening? Why do you think women, aren't being hired for jobs or something like that? Or why do you think they're being paid less, something like that? I don't claim to be the most well versed on those particular statistics, but I do claim to have knowledge from other fields that I think also apply. So if you take something like, if you study something like sociology of education, the education process, because I think there is a lot to pull from like DEI initiatives and affirmative action initiatives here. When you look at historically the way that we'll take Jewish students, there were in the United States at one point where certain students weren't allowed to go to certain colleges. Legally, that was like permitted, where you could deny a student based on the color of their skin, et cetera, whatever. That changed. And what changed was kind of, well, you can, you can't, deny them on the basis of their race, but college administration and faculty and their admissions departments started having application processes where they would evaluate the character of these students. And it was said at one point that Jewish students or Asian students didn't have the type of character they were looking for. And so what happened is you had the large disparity of like those types of students not being able to attend colleges. So I think a lot of similar things to that happen in the same way, maybe not within hiring women, but maybe where those kind of measures that used to be illegal are now, or that used to be legal are now illegal. And so they've compartmentalized and found ways to kind of change those things.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let me ask one more question on this topic, and then we'll hop over to abortion to end it. But is there something you could point to that it would, similar to the question I had at the beginning about feminism in general, but when it comes to this, the wage gap or just males and females in jobs altogether, what would take place that would make you feel like that part is taken care of? Like what would you need to see? Like, are you just looking for studies? Is it like how often individuals tell you a certain thing? What would make you go like, oh, okay, in the U.S., all the U.S., not even just the North and the South too. In the U.S., even though there's different amounts of people making money and in different types of jobs, Anne, feel that the jobs women are at, they're at the ones they want, not just the ones that they're like kind of forced into.
1 second. Okay. Apologize.
No, you're good.
The question was what I would find to fix that gap, or like what do I think?
No. What would have to take place to make you think like right now? My assumption is that men and women looking for work, they're mostly looking for something they feel like they can do or want to do. So I don't think there's a problem there personally. Statistically, I could be convinced that there's an issue with the wage gap, but for the most part, as far as choosing jobs, getting jobs, the jobs they work, I would just naturally assume, until shown otherwise, that people are just choosing the jobs they want. Now you're thinking that there's not enough opportunity and there's social things getting in the way of women getting the jobs they want. So what would it look like for you to say, because we're not looking at stats, right? Unless the stats are people being questioned for like a questionnaire for a study. What's going to make you say like, oh, in the U.S. now both men and women they have the jobs they want?
Well, the original conversation was about the pay gap. And then I kind of made it clear that I am not the most well versed, but I said at the beginning, I think there's probably good arguments for the pay gap, one, existing, and two, it being a problem. Those arguments aren't ones that I'm particularly super familiar with. The issue isn't also necessarily, because there's a difference between getting paid the same and being hired in an interview. So I think people are seeking out the same jobs, but women are likely, if the arguments for the pay gap existing are true, being paid less for the same jobs. So the opportunity for the job is there legally. Remember, like, this isn't, I'm not making a legal case that women don't legally have opportunities to the same exact job. I'm making more of a social case that there should be, if the pay gap does exist in the way that people say that it does, there should be different socialization about the way that we value women and value women's work.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think because we were talking about opportunity of jobs within the conversation of pay gap, I think I just hopped over to a separate thing. So let's just assume we get the pay gap figured out. Let's say we're both satisfied with, in this hypothetical America, pay gaps figured out. Do you feel, and also not legally, but just societally, do you feel like that women do not have equal opportunity for the jobs themselves? Like, is it part of your, like, when you have a list of all the things that you want feminism to achieve, do you think the opportunity, not the legal opportunity, but just the opportunity for jobs does not exist? Or like, yeah, there's a question in there somewhere. See if you found one in there.
Sure. If the question is, are there probably still widespread practices, as there have been historically, where people don't hire women because they consider something about them being women to be a hindrance to the job, where it really isn't a hindrance to the job in any significant way, at least? Do I think those practices still exist? Probably. I think they're a lot more covert than they used to be. And I think this might seem a little bit of a stretch, but I think it gets the point across. I think the rhetoric that you hear every time that we have a female presidential candidate kind of speaks to that. And it speaks to the way that we still view women in society. Like, they're too emotional to hold these positions. What if she gets on her period and she sends a nuke to Iran? Like, then what? And you hear these like ridiculous hypotheticals made about, like, well, what if a woman is just too emotional and too crazy to hold this position? I think that that's probably kind of highlighting the way that people still think about females. And maybe it's more exaggerated because she's a female, Kamala or Hillary Clinton when she ran. Maybe it is more exaggerated just because it is a presidential election. But I think it does also speak to the way that we are socialized and what positions we think women are deserving of.
Yeah. Well, and also people act weird on the internet. The internet's a weird thing, and I don't think we evolved to have conversations through text on the internet. I think a lot of these people in person, even if they would share different opinions, they would talk differently because of how the repercussions would be. And so the internet does make things complicated. Like, you can find anybody from any direction that has had like death threats for various reasons. And anyways, the internet's just complicated. But yeah, okay, let's go ahead and put a pin in that topic as well, though. I definitely think you make some good points in there, and it's something I want to think about more. But if you have time, maybe we could do a little bit of talk on abortion. I don't have a firm stance, but I do enjoy.
Sure, there was.
Oh yeah.
I think there's a like still. Sorry, there was a note I wanted to make earlier when you brought up that you wrote the name of someone down. The professor that I brought up, Dr. Jenny Stuber, which I believe is Bert that you were referencing. I wasn't sure what you wrote them down in reference to. I want to make sure you get accurate information on what those people do and what publications they've done.
For sure. So I watched your interview with her on your channel, and that was great. But no, the name I wrote down was Martha Burt, because you were talking about Martha Burt's work. And anyways, I was just going to look her up in general.
Okay. Yeah, the vast majority of her research focuses on homelessness and disparities in homelessness between genders, but she does have a study on rape myths. But yeah, okay. Sorry, I thought you made my fault for you getting them confused, so I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, no, it's all right. And in general, when people bring up any topics, whether it's articles, books, authors, I like to just look them all up. So yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so with abortion though, I guess I'll just preface it with I don't have a strong stance, but I find that the topic so fascinating that I enjoy arguing it from almost any position. It's probably the topic I've thought about philosophically the most. So just might be worth keeping in mind as we discuss it. Usually, how I talk about abortion is that it's one of the most unique cases that has ever existed, because when humans decide to have a society, there's like two of the most important things humans do with a society. They want protection from being killed, because that's like what we want the most, is to be alive. So you want protections from being killed, but then you also want bodily autonomy. You want to be able to do anything you can do that doesn't harm another person. And so abortion's the weird case where these things sort of clash, and it really comes down to figuring out value for this unborn, if you view it as a human of value or not. And so, anyways, with that being said, do you want to share your stance on abortion?
Sure. Just generally, I hold what would be called a prosentience or sentientism view. And that just states that the things that, when I typically look out into the world, that I value are those that can have positive and mental sorry, oh my goodness, positive and negative mental states. And the things that don't have those things are the things that I tend to care a lot less about. And so when I examine cases of abortion, if you look at most abortions, they tend to occur within the time span that the consensus of biology, or like the consensus amongst biologists, is that the fetus is not sentient at. So those cases I would find permissible. And then the cases afterwards would be the cases that I have moral qualms with.
Okay, okay. We might align more than I thought. I know when you had that debate with Andrew at the beginning, I can't remember his name, Brian. Brian had mentioned that one of the topics would be that you are in favor of most abortions. I think that was the word, not in favor, but most abortions was in there. And I took that to mean like most abortions as in no cutoffs. But now I realize you mean because most abortions are pre-sentience, that those are the most abortions. So I
Right.
prepared my mind wrong for that. Okay, yeah, yeah. So there's a couple things that I think are interesting when talking about abortion. One thing that I think is interesting, and this is just a semantics thing, but I personally think that no matter what side somebody's on, it's good to use accurate language. And so from my understanding, from conception, this is when we have new DNA, and so that is a living human. It doesn't mean that there's value. You can say that human does not deserve protection, or something like that, because somebody can say that they don't value it. In fact, I would say for the most part, unless I'm convinced otherwise, I do not value a zygote, which is a human. But I think it's important that I say that it's a human. What are your thoughts on the idea of referring to it as a human? And I don't mean referring to it as that it is human, like skin cells, blood cells are human, but those are not a human. Sperm itself is human. It's not a human. But at conception is a human. Would you agree with this?
That is actually something I recently have considered more, and have an issue with the way that people use the language.
Hmm.
And it's not for any political motivation. It's not for any sort of like, thing that agenda that I'm trying to push for. I have qualms with the claim that all biologists agree that it's human life. That is not true. um, the vast majority agree that it's human life. But that is
Mhm.
still, I believe it's 4% of biologists don't even agree that it's human life at conception. Because the question isn't, does it have human DNA? Well, obviously it has human DNA. Okay, well, the question isn't, does it have 4 arms? Well, no, not all humans have 4 arms. Um, the question is far more complex than I think anyone right now debating the abortion topic has the ability to understand with the knowledge that they currently have.
Yeah.
Um, so the question is muddy. I am fine for the sake of philosophical discussions calling it a human, but to say that that's totally uncontested and not up for question is not true.
Yeah. Well, I think everything's up for question, and any definitions can change at any time. In my mind, it makes sense to have a state, like if we refer to somebody as being a human, to know what those ranges are. And then we can have like our separate subcategories as well. To me, it makes sense not just that it is human DNA, but that it is its own unique individual DNA. Like, so the sperm itself obviously has human DNA. It's living. It's of the human species, but it's not like its own. It's not a human. And so, like, I think of us humans as our first stage of life, as a human. From my understanding, and I'm no expert on this, and I could just be convinced otherwise tomorrow. Would be at conception, and then and I think the semantics of it kind of throw off the conversations because it doesn't matter if it's human. Nobody needs to, or a human. I think that's an important element. It's not about when human life begins. It's when a human life begins. But I think it matters so much more how we value these things. And I'm with you on sentience, I believe. But even separate from sentience, I value different things at different stages. Like I value a 15-year-old more than I value a 2-day-old baby. And yeah, so anyways, I'm trying to think. Okay, so we both agree that sentience is a huge factor here. I am curious to hear what your stance is on which abortions you feel comfortable with after sentience. And we don't have to declare where sentience is. The majority of people, for the majority of recent history, I believe, claim that it's around 20 weeks. There are recent studies that seem very promising that show it's more like 12 weeks, but we can just ignore that and say that we would follow the reliable science, and so sentience is where it's at. If you were to permit abortions after that, what would that look like, and would your morals look different than the legal side of it?
Yeah, those cases are difficult, but I might make some exception, like your typical pro-lifer makes, and say, hey, I'm only fine with it, so far as the mother's life is in danger, or so far as even maybe the baby's life is severely at risk. And we can talk about that. There's a pretty interesting case that came out of Texas, I believe a few years ago now, with Kate Cox, who sought out an abortion in the state of Texas, and she was denied one, even though her baby was almost certainly going to die within hours of being born. And it caused, significant health risk to her. So if you asked me, like, okay, well, here's the case of Kate Cox, would you allow her an abortion even if it's late term? I would say, yep, Kate Cox can have an abortion. Now, whether, on these other like extreme cases, it's hard to tell. It's almost like on a base by base or case by case basis. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, let me ask you. Okay, let's say that somebody is pregnant because of sexual assault, and they decide they don't want to have an abortion. They wait a while, and then maybe when they hit, let's say 8 months, they're 8 months into the pregnancy, and they change their mind. They decide, I don't want this baby that came from sexual assault. Not only do I not want it, but I don't like the idea of knowing that it exists in the world. So I want this terminated. How would you look at that case?
Yeah, I think I'd be fine pointing at that and going, that doesn't, and maybe just to get clear on my semantics, when I say that that's bad, I mean that that's something I prefer not to happen.
Hmm.
Legally, the question about that is going to hinge on a lot of like empirical data that I don't think that maybe we really have the best access to right now.
Hmm.
Because the question could hinge on like, okay, well, what if we out and like we, from what people believe, have started to see is that doctors, what if we outlaw it past my standard, past sentience or something like that?
Hmm.
And people, and it just so happens that like, okay, well now doctors are actually scared, because it's outlawed past this point, to act in the cases that they think that I think that they should act in. So maybe,
Hmm.
we ban it past 8 months or something like that, or we ban it past 7 months or something like that. And now doctors become afraid to perform an abortion, even if the mother's life is at risk. That's going to hinge on like empirical data. Like if that's actually going to be the outcome, and they will be scared to act, then I'd be less inclined to put restrictions,
Well, let's
like
put it
legally
on a
wise.
vacuum. Let's put it in a vacuum and just say that that reason that for whatever case in these situations we can know that we're viewing it as 100% the sexual assault is what led to this, and deciding if this should be a legal abortion or not for that reason alone will not affect other things outside of that. Do you think that that should be a legal option with that reason alone?
No, with the sexual assault case reason alone, no. If we're making it a vacuous case and saying that all other things are controlled for,
Hmm.
then yeah, no, I don't think it should be a legal case. And I also would find it like I said, when I say morally wrong, I'm saying it's against my preferences, so morally wrong as well.
Okay, and so that topic would fit from wherever the cutoff is for sentience. Um, that there's no wiggle room after that
Mhm.
for the sexual assault situation. Okay, um, gotcha. And so I'm just trying to think of are what cases would you find acceptable outside? Are there any outside of the mother's life being at risk that you would find acceptable specifically after sentience is reached?
Outside of the mother's life being at risk, there might be some cases where I point to like the baby's life being at risk. Like I said, in the
Mm.
case with Kate Cox, I I'm of the opinion, and some medical professionals disagree with me, that her life was not at risk. But it was almost guaranteed that her baby would die hours, maybe a week after it was born. Because I've looked into that case, I've looked into the condition. Statistically, that's just the outcome, the predicted outcome. I would have permitted her an abortion. So that's just one case I can point to. And that case, she was having leaking of amniotic fluid, and her baby was diagnosed late term with trisomy 18, which is the condition that caused that particular outcome to be predicted.
Mm.
So in that case, I would allow it. There might be arguments to be made about significant impairment, like, well, if you give birth to this baby, all of your limbs will fall off or something crazy like that, and you'll go blind or something like that. I might permit it in those cases.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay. Okay, I have an interesting hypothetical I want to bring your way that doesn't sound like it's an abortion thing, but it'll tie back to it. Um, let's say we have this hypothetical where we're at an ER. The ER has an AI doctor. So the doctor is just able to look at people and get a really good idea of what their odds are on saving people and whatnot. There's only one doctor working for some reason. It's AI, so you'd think there'd be a bunch of them, but there's only one. And let's say two people come in, and person A stabs person B. So person B is innocent victim, just gets stabbed. That person being stabbed is trying to defend themselves, so they stab person A back. They're both stabbed now. They both need help from a doctor. Person A is the bad guy. Person B is the innocent person, but they're both stabbed. They both need help. The AI doctor looks at both of them and can tell that if they try to save person A, the bad guy, first, there's going to be a 10% chance that they can save both. But if they try to save person B first, the innocent person, there's only going to be like a 2% chance that they can save both. So whichever one they go with, they're probably only going to save one. Do you think that whether it's AI doctors or regular doctors, that anything like that should factor who they save, or should they always go with the odds of saving the most humans?
So that's a difficult question. So long as we're stipulating in this case that both humans are sentient, I'm fine applying
Yeah.
this later to
Oh yeah.
abortion,
No.
but that's kind of just putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then there is also cases in the abortion case that might make this a little bit different, but we can talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
In this case, generally, would it be a good, like, if you're asking me which one would map onto reality better, generally, it would be better if we tried to save the most people as possible.
Okay.
And that's stipulating sentient people as possible. Generally, like, this is the way that I think that, like, doctors should think about their jobs and should think about how they treat
Mhm.
patients is like, hey, I'm going to try to save as many lives as possible, or save whatever has the most, like, benefit to it. Like,
Mhm.
maybe, okay, I have a low chance of saving both, but one of them will go on to live like a good life, a decent life, and the other one will go on to, like, just die from cancer the next day. Then the person I should really focus on saving is the one who, like, will have a good life. So there's a
Interesting.
lot that goes into that. So that's hard to tell. I don't think doctors are in the position of making, like, moral decisions about guilt. Would I prefer the doctor to save the person who, like, is innocent? Yeah, kind of.
Hmm.
I would prefer that, but generally, yeah, I don't think doctors should be doing that.
Yeah, so I'm the same way. If I witnessed it and I was the doctor, I think I would selfishly, I don't know if that's the right word, I would save the innocent person, even if I knew the odds were better the other way around. But I would want to be in a society that did not look at that kind of thing, or even if it's not about judging who was right or wrong, even if it was just the knowledge that this person went to prison for murdering people in the past, but they were let out, and then this other person was like a top-notch citizen. Still, it would come down to saving the best odds of saving the most people.
Right.
I've thought of the cancer one that you brought up, and I have not come up with an answer for that. But my second question, so this is like a four-part question, hypothetical. The second question is less complicated than the cancer thing, but it still makes it a little more complicated. Would age matter? So if you have a 30-year-old and a 90-year-old, would you still go with the odds of, if you start with the 90-year-old, you have better odds of saving both? Do you, like, should they discriminate based on them being 90?
Uh, yes, in the average case. Um,
Hmm.
I think it gets a little bit more complicated. Like, if you were to stipulate that the 90-year-old was going to live 500 more years, but then, like, and have, like, a really good 500 more years, but then, like, the younger person was not going to live as long, then I'm going to say, like, yeah, save the 90-year-old, because you're going to get, like, a better outcome from that. Like, you're going to have one person who gets a really long, happy life.
Yeah.
There are philosophers who I will give credit to for writing on these types of specific things that you might find really interesting if you've ever heard the
Mm-hmm.
name David de Grazia. Um,
Mm-mm.
he's written what he's called a time relative interest account of how harm occurs, and then what should we do, who gets harmed the most in the scenario where they lose their life. Now, I have my own qualms with the talk about harm of death. The way that people talk about it, I have issue with, but I think
Mm-hmm.
generally his account is good for your practical scenarios. So the time relative interest account of harm kind of gives us a base to go off of, and says that those who are more connected psychologically to themselves or to their futures are the ones who are harmed the most. So you might say, like, you brought up the case earlier, you would care a lot less if, like, a 2-day old died versus a 15-year old. And
Mm-hmm.
DeGrazia's job there in his paper, Time Relative Interest Account, um, talks about why you kind of have that feeling, why you have that intuition that, like, it would be more wrong to kill a 15-year-old than it would be to, like, a 2-day old.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, I'll definitely look into him. And I actually have formed a list of every age that exists, of the order I rank them mattering in. Like, if I were going to save
Yeah.
one of two people in a burning building, and anyways, but it's complicated when it comes to what you'd want a doctor to do in your society. With the
Right.
90-year-old, 50-year-old thing, I personally lean towards the same thing as the other case, where I say save whichever one's going to save more lives. If the AI doctor could detect the thing that you said about this one has cancer, they're going to die within a week, then I don't know. That's complicated. But so, anyways, just to share my thoughts. Okay, so now let's add another case where you have a 25-year-old and a newborn baby. One AI doctor, same situation where if they go to save the baby first, there's like a 10% chance they'll get both. If they go to save the 25-year-old first, they're 2% chance.
Sure. Yeah, I would probably say the 25-year-old in that case. If I look
Okay.
at the things, let's say we're talking about like, okay, we're talking about who do we value more in this case. Because there's talks about like who do we value more, and there's also talks about like what DeGrazia talks about, like who could be harmed the most, and therefore who would it be wrong the most to do it to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I look at it this way. I would value the 25-year-old more because of the way and the things that I value about my life. When I talk about why, like what makes my life great, because I do think life is great. Sometimes I might not feel like that in the moment, but I do think overall net, my life is good. And when I think about what makes that good is my experiences. I have the ability to, graduate from one of the top, I think, 10 colleges in my state, which is pretty good for me. I'm okay with that. I have the ability to go try new vegan restaurants. I have the ability to, you know, hug my friends and talk to them till 3 o'clock in the morning at night. And I find all of those things very valuable. And those are the types of things that when I think about the experience of like a newborn, or even, when we talk about like fetuses who are non-sentient, well, one, the fetus who is non-sentient can't experience those things at all. They don't even know the what it's likeness of that those things. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the type of idea or mental state of a newborn is probably one more similar to the non-sentient fetus than it is to a 25-year-old, which I'm 24. I turned
Yeah.
25 this year. So I really value 25-year-olds.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So first of all, I want to point out this is rare. So I agree with you here. Most people I talk to do not agree. It doesn't matter if they are the most pro-choice person in the world or pro-life person. When that question's asked about a 25-year-old and a newborn, they say the same thing of like the doctor shouldn't discriminate. Can we work our way up in age to where you think it should be the case where if the odds are better with saving a 2-year-old first or a 3-year-old first, or at whatever point, where is that and what is the reasoning behind it?
That's hard. And I don't claim to have a certain answer. I can approximate what my answer might be if I really, really think about it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Do you
if you
actually,
gave
can
me
I
the
pause you
case
real
of
quick?
like,
I'm going to pause
sure,
you real quick just because I don't know why, but I feel like if I introduce my thoughts here, you might you might like it and you might go like, oh, actually that's as
okay,
of now where I stand.
yeah,
I don't know why I'm not letting you just answer and then me sharing mine, but I just think it'd
you're
be
fine.
interesting. So
You're fine.
my thought on this, because I care about sentience as far as harm goes, but as far as the idea of a life not existing, I care about a will to live, a thought of the future. And this is just something I care about. It's something I talk about when I talk to people about veganism. But the idea, like, if a random stranger died in Texas, that who was 25 and he just died, and I'm trying to think of why do I care that this person died? They're dead, so they're not suffering. So I don't care about that. If I ignore the idea of them having like loved ones that are sad, okay, we'll ignore all that. What do I care about? I care that I don't want to die because I have a want to live, a will for the future. I have so many things I want to do. And I think, what if that person had that? If that person didn't, if they thought living's cool, I'm not going to kill myself, but living's cool, but I have no interest of the future, I have no care of anything in the future, and they died, I don't think I really care. Like I still wouldn't want if somebody killed them, there would be the legal stuff or whatever. But the only thing I can think of why death matters with humans is a will for a future. So I factor that in here, and it's interesting. There's a loose idea from the professionals that study this kind of thing that we don't develop a will to live, or more specifically, an idea of the future until around 3 years old, somewhere between like 2.5 and 3 years old. Um, and if this can be detected, I think that's where my cutoff would be. Is I would say, like, I mean, I have kids. I've seen these kids at couple months in. They're just fun, cute blobs. They're just sitting there. They're not thinking about much. Now, I personally would save my kids at any age before any other human or even countries full of humans. But just as far as looking at what a society should do, if you have like a 2 month old or a 25-year-old or a 24-year-old that's about to be 25, I would say you save this 24, 25-year-old because of where their brain development's at or whatever. So anyways, my thoughts come down to this idea of if we can have an arbitrary line that matches up closely with the idea of a will to live or a want for the future. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that is an interesting thought, and I think that that is probably worth like philosophically investigating more about like wills to live. That type of stuff is also discussed in a lot of abortion literature about um, I can bring it back to what I was saying about like, okay, well, I value myself and other 25-year-olds because we have the ability to experience, we have the ability to experience graduation and good restaurants and seeing friends and family, etc., and getting married and doing having kids and whatever. But we value those things. We do value some aspects of those things intrinsically on their own. I think just at the for their own sake, if I could say that. But I think that we do value some of those things because we have the will to live, right? Like think about the cases, and I'm a psychology major. Think about the cases of people who completely have lost their will to live. They literally, and I'm fine in a lot of cases with permitting these people to commit suicide because I think that those people, one, don't have an obligation like morally to live. Um, for the most part. But I think that if somebody is rational and has come to the conclusion, my life is net suffering, I have no reason to force that person to live in net suffering. And I think that those cases are rare, but I think that you bring up a good point, though. I think that the will to live, the desire to continue living, along with the experiences that that person has and values, should be stuff that we take into consideration.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. This is all complicated. And yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think. One thing that I find pretty fascinating about this topic and this hypothetical is a lot of people that are pro-choice. They'll say that they're the cases where they're not is if there's the risk of the life of the mother. And I haven't had a chance to ask too many pro-life people this question, but if they were to say that if a brand new 1 day old baby was there and a 25-year-old woman, and they were going to say just save the most lives, then there's almost no difference between that and like minutes before with a baby inside of a 25-year-old, where if they would say, like, I almost just want to hold them to being consistent in the same way at the beginning, where if they view life at conception, they should be against the pill, IUD, all these different things. Not that I want those things gone, but I do like people staying consistent. So if they are life at conception, they should be against all those things. And if they would save a baby over a 25-year-old, then they should also feel the same way about that fetus that is a day away from being a baby. So anyways, it's a pretty interesting one to try to hold pro-life people accountable. And yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other
Yeah,
route
I
to
think
go. Yeah.
sorry, that lag is crazy. I think
You're fine.
that and I do want to be honest here. I think that there are pro-life arguments that are worth considering and should be taken into account and have added really productive things to the abortion conversation. Probably the most influential one has been by Don Marquis. He's written a paper called Future Like Ours, the
Yeah.
wrongness of death and the harm of abortion. Um, Really popular argument. You'll see people like Trent Horn argue those things in like debates with Destiny and stuff like that. If
Hmm.
you've seen that,
I have, yeah.
really common argument. I have my issues with it, obviously, because I'm still pro-choice. Um,
Hmm.
but I do want to be fair in that assessment and pointing out that there are successful, um, to some people, just to be clear, not successful on their own, but successful arguments that have really added a lot to the discussion. There is actually something interesting. You mentioned that you believe that most people, even the pro-choice people that you've talked to, would save the baby over the 25-year-old. I
Hmm.
actually have some data in quotation marks that you might be interested in because I did this a while back and I posted to multiple social media platforms this kind of like trolley problem hypothetical of like,
Hmm.
hey, say you have, a baby who was just born, or I don't remember if I made it a baby or if I made it a fetus, but I think I made it something that might be mildly like sentient, some human that's like mildly sentient or something like that. They haven't considered their future. They don't have any deep hopes, dreams, or desires or anything like that. And then consider on the other side of the track, there's a 25-year-old who has hopes and dreams and desires. They live their life as the average person does. They're about as happy as the average person is with their life. They're not severely depressed, factoring out all of like the insane stuff. Just the average person. You have a 25-year-old and like a newborn or something like that. And
Hmm.
I want to say 80% of people who responded to that said that they would save the 25-year-old. Only about 20 to 30% said that they would save the infant. And my data set could be biased, and I'm fully willing to admit that.
Hmm.
But quite a lot of the people who at least have considered this deeply and more philosophically, people who are um, both graduate students who engage in philosophy and both undergraduate students who engage in philosophy, the vast majority said that they would save the 25. So if you're interested in that, I actually
Yeah.
have that and I can send it to you.
Yeah, awesome. You should. I'm curious though. Was the trolley on a track going for one of them, and they would switch it, or is it just saying that it's not aimed for one, but you have to pick one, and then they just pick one?
The latter.
Okay, because that I could see that being the case. So the thing that I'm saying that I don't see as the case is well, yeah, it's complicated because the thing with the hypothetical is in both cases there is a possibility to save both, and it's talking about like what you would want a doctor to do in your society, and so the actions an individual would take or what somebody thinks of as moral might be different than what they want in a society. But it does seem like this is close enough that it does kind of give you a good idea of what people would want. Um, yeah, yeah, that's interesting. One last thing I do want to go over is I don't think you're pro-choice. And obviously we have our labels, pro-life and pro-choice, and people can like it might make sense to feel like whichever one you're closer to, you call yourself that thing. But from my understanding, when people talk about now I think most people are not pro-choice and most people are not pro-life. Most people are pro-viability, and then there's some people that are pro-sentience. And not that those are necessarily the best terms for it. I think we should have these separate terms. But there is a section of people that are pro choice that believe that whenever the unborn human is inside of a woman, that woman has the choice because of bodily autonomy. It's her body, her choice. If there is a stage of development that makes you say, okay, you can't do anything past this stage, then it doesn't mean that it was ever about body and choice. It means that earlier, before, in your case, before sentience, it wasn't that it's her body, her choice. It's there's no value to that thing. So who cares? Just you can wipe it out. And I agree with you. There is no value. You can wipe it out. And then anything after that point, there is value. So you can't. So in at least as the word choice is involved, your stance doesn't revolve around choice. It just revolves around the legality based on value. Does that make sense? Where some people, it truly is about choice. It truly is. They might morally think it's wrong to terminate a human that's 8 months gestation, but they will say legally it should be done. And to me, that makes sense to call pro-choice. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the semantics. I think there's something important to be said about a lot of the times I think when people are saying they're pro-life or pro-choice, it might mean something like what I mean, like I'm just for most abortions or against most abortions. And that's fine. People use the language in that way sometimes, and sometimes they use it other ways, like, oh, I'm morally against it or morally for it. And then sometimes people use choice to mean I am pro abortion for the reason of bodily autonomy. Um,
Hmm.
Now,
But you're not, right?
there is, and I'll take this from an interview that I have yet. Hmm?
Sorry to cut you off, but you're
I'll
not
get
for
into that in a
you're
second.
okay. Okay, sorry.
I'll take this little. Oh, you're fine. Oh, you're fine. I did the lag went crazy for like half a second.
Mhm.
I'll add this tidbit in from a interview that I have yet to publish because I'm quite lazy with stuff like that. It's like hours of editing. But I interviewed a political scientist. His name is Joshua Gellers, who's written a fantastic book called Rights for Robots, where he kind of talks about his criteria for considering something both morally and legally and socially as well. And he kind of points out that it's not like there is this one criterion and we go, okay, now you have consideration, now you don't have consideration. It's more so a menu of what people kind of consider. And that was the word that he used was menu of things that you consider. Bodily autonomy is a strong consideration for why I believe a lot of abortions should be considered. Um, I think that if someone didn't have bodily autonomy, then the abortion conversation wouldn't be a conversation. It would just be, no, who cares if we restrict your rights, right? Like it would kind of be like, well, who cares? You don't have the autonomy anyways. Like we can just do whatever we want to you. So it is an important part of the conversation. And I'm fine with labeling myself pro-choice. I'm fine with labeling myself pro-sentience or a sentientist or whatever you want to call it. I'm
Mhm.
fine with any of those labels. I think generally labels are hard to get across the point uh, in its entirety in the first place. So I'm fine. I'm always fine elaborating.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, but I don't think your stance is based on autonomy. I only mean that like factually. I because I mean, I guess it's based on autonomy. Autonomy, if you're just saying in general, therefore, the reason you're against most developmental stages of abortion are because of the autonomy of the unborn. But like the reason you're okay with the abortions you're okay with is because of the lack of value of the non-sentient, correct?
Oh, the okay. It seemed like the end of what you were saying was the reason why I'm okay with most abortions is because of the lack of the value of the non-sentient fetus.
Hmm. Correct. Yeah.
Okay. I'm fine with saying that that's a large part of my consideration, but a large part of my consideration is autonomy. Because, like I said, otherwise, if I wasn't considering autonomy whatsoever, I would say, fuck it, do whatever you want to women. I don't care. Like,
Okay.
I
Well.
mean,
Okay.
sure,
Hold
make
on.
them carry babies. I don't give a shit.
Okay, so let's new hypothetical. In the future, in the U.S., every single baby is made in a lab. Okay, so no more women having babies inside of them. So they're all made in a lab. People that want to make babies, they go to this lab. They give their sperm. They give their egg. The eggs fertilized, and for approximately 9 months, that fertilized egg will grow into what will be handed over to these people. What would your cutoff be if the people that brought their sperm and egg in and started this process, would there be a cutoff, and what would your cutoff be for when they can terminate that? We'll call it a human.
Yeah. So I'll kind of give my answer short, but with like an asterisk on the end, like with kind of a clause that makes sure that something is understood. Um,
Hmm.
that would be the answer to that question would be sentience. However, the reason why that the only answer to that question is sentience, and maybe we can get into some property rights, like maybe that is their property now and there should be consideration there. But the reason why the sole answer to that is mainly sentience is because now you've stipulated out that there's a concern. So now there is no issue about whether or not it's somebody's body. So I would be more
Hmm.
inclined to say that, yeah, I mean, they do have to fully sustain it after, it's sentient or something like that.
Hmm. Okay, and so in this case, the terminating before sentience outside of the woman is because there's no value there. There's nothing that deserves any protection, and so you allow that outside of the woman, but you allow the exact same thing inside the woman. And so, to me, there's no bodily autonomy element there because no matter what, you allow it without the body part. Okay, and then after that stage, if we're looking at anything past sentience, aside from a couple situations, you are not in favor of that being legal, and so the bodily autonomy of the woman that's pregnant only ever comes into play when it's the idea of choosing between one life or another, which you feel the same way about, even if there's an already born baby. If you have a 1 day old baby and a 25-year-old, you save the woman. And if you have a pregnant person where the fetus needs to be, let's say, terminated to save the woman, you save it there. So I'm not trying to say anything negative here. I'm just trying to analyze this because I think it's fascinating. But it sounds like there's no way to look at that where bodily autonomy is your argument. Your argument is just based on the value.
Okay, maybe we can look at it this way. There are arguments for bodily autonomy that I find extremely convincing. And I think that should be considered in the conversation, even if they're not the main factor. So we can take
Hmm.
somebody like Judith Thompson, who's written on abortion. We can take people like Marianne Warren, who have rightfully made arguments, and Kate Greasley, who I think has done a really good job at encompassing a lot of the arguments for abortion, including those that revolve around, women's rights, bodily autonomy, sentience, all sorts of things, and value. Um, I think we can take probably the thing that might get this point across the best is the case that is given about the violinist, if you know anything about that. Maybe we can start
Yeah.
there. Right. Okay. So Judith Thompson's violinist argument goes something like, you wake up one day, and it has this thought experiment has been modified over the years as it needed to be. You wake up one day and you're connected via like a blood transfusion to the world's most famous violinist. Um, and the question is about like, okay, well, he provides a lot of utility to the world, but do you have an obligation, even though he is sentient, to continue giving your blood to him if disconnecting means that he'll die? And the for a lot of people, the obvious answer is like, no, you don't have an obligation to do that. You don't have to stay hooked up to him. Like, you can disconnect that. That's fine. A lot of people have a moral issue with that. They're kind of there. Um, but there's also, more arguments that have developed based on that. There's bodily integrity arguments that have developed based on that. And I think that those deserve rightful consideration. So when you say, well, it's only really sentience, when I consider cases where both actors are sentient, they're both the same age, they both have the same like psychological profile, bodily autonomy is something I take largely
Hmm.
into consideration. We can even take the case, Judith Thompson comes up with another um, thought experiment that's supposed to kind of illustrate the strength of like bodily autonomy as a right. Um, it's called the people seats. So
Hmm.
imagine you're in a house, and every so often these people seeds, they get blown by the wind, and sometimes they land up in people's houses. And what you've done, even if you've taken like a screen protector and put it over your windows, or maybe you've tried to keep them out minimally, somehow a seed still ends up in your home. And let's say that those seeds turn into people once they land into people's homes. Now, are you obligated now to care for this person who happened to blow like by the wind into your home, even if you didn't take all of the precautions that you could have possibly taken? So I think that those two thought experiments, at least the ways that I respond to those both morally and kind of emotionally, I consider bodily autonomy very strongly.
I get the idea of viewing it as a good argument or an interesting argument, but I was just pointing out that those don't affect your stance on abortion. I get that those would affect your stance on two 25-year-olds, um, but your stance is based on the sentience, no matter the reason, whether people took precautions or no precautions. If they didn't get the abortion before sentience, and then once sentience is reached, then they're not allowed to get it. So it just seems like so my stance on abortion is identical to yours. Like I've almost never heard one so identical. And I, as much as bodily autonomy matters to me, I don't think it has anything to do with my stance on abortion, which is the same stance as yours. It has to do with when does an individual have protection. So if anything, the only element of abortion that involves bodily autonomy is once sentience is reached, the bodily autonomy is the argument for saving that unborn, I guess. But I do want to comment on the violinist argument. I think the biggest flaw there, because I think one of the best elements of an argument for abortions not happening in the case of when we value an unborn human is the idea that the pregnant female made the unborn dependent on her. And I think with the violinist, it doesn't cover that, where most pregnancies that is the case. So whether it was intended or not, they made them dependent on them. And the violinist, it's just that they are attached. So here's a hypothetical I want to give you. I view it as like almost a reaction to Judith Thompson's violinist argument. And obviously, since we agree on the abortion topic, this doesn't affect that. But this might be something interesting you might want to discuss with other people. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. So let's say we're in this hypothetical world where all humans have little cupboards in their stomach. Just a little door, you open it up, and you can put things in, and you can shut this cupboard. And then also there are shrink rays. People can shrink people down. So this random 25-year-old adult against their will was just shrunken down, and somebody opened up this cupboard in their stomach, put the 25-year-old in, and closed it. They put on their space helmet, and they go up into space. And so now this person that put an adult 25-year-old that's shrunken down inside of their stomach cupboard is up in space with a space helmet where they can breathe. And they say, okay, I put this person in here, but I don't want them in there anymore. It's my body. I want to choose to remove them from here. But up in space, if they open it up, that person's going to die, and they made that person dependent on them. Would you think that a society should make it illegal for them to open that cupboard and let them die up there?
Yeah, I would say that should be something that's illegal. The reasons for that being that, well, at least in this scenario, the person was already sentient. So there is
Yeah.
a combination of concern there. Maybe this will help kind of clarify part of where I take bodily autonomy into consideration, because it's very important to me, and I do take it into consideration. Take the case that you gave me earlier, and this might elucidate a little bit for you, of somebody who is late term and was sexually assaulted and came to the realization that it would be devastating for them to live their life with their assaulter's baby, and they had no way of giving it up for adoption or something like that. I would feel much more inclined or less bad about that person having an abortion than I would the person who actively chose to do so. So there is some consideration there about choice, about decision and will to do that thing, that I consider, whether or not this person still has the right to bodily autonomy or not, or whether or not, how much I care about their bodily autonomy or not.
Gotcha. Yeah,
And
and
there
I
is,
see that.
I did
Yeah.
mention there. oh, sorry, there has been adaptations to Thompson's violinist argument where it's stipulated that you did in fact hook yourself up to the violinist and he just, became sentient after a while. I wouldn't find it,
Mm.
you know, bad to unhook him before he became sentient, but I would find it somewhat bad if you unhooked him after. But I might still say that you have the right to.
Ooh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, it's complicated. I've been going over different ideas like where I don't think any like parent should have to give their kid a kidney, but should a parent have to donate blood if their blood
Right.
is the only match for their child? And I actually think maybe with the blood one, they should. And part of that would be because the blood, reproduces. So you don't have this like, I think it might all come down to the risk that you have and what we should consider obligations
Mhm.
of for adults. Like it's the same thing where if an adult's walking past and a toddler is drowning in a tiny puddle, I think they should be obligated to pull the toddler out. But if a 5-year old
Right.
is drowning in the river, I don't know if an adult should be obligated to risk their own life to go in the river to get somebody. So,
Yeah, and I think that those thought experiments have done a really good job at trying to question people's intuitions and see where people lean. I have the same type of intuition where, like, maybe morally, I would feel kind of weird if you didn't give them your kidney, especially if it like wouldn't cause you severe harm or something like that. Maybe morally, I would feel really weird, like, or really bad about it, like if you didn't give them blood. Legally, would I obligate you to it? Almost certainly not. But if you are interested in those types of things, talking about like moral obligation, that I can probably recommend straight off the bat, and that would be Peter Singer. It seems like maybe you're
mm,
familiar with him if you brought up the
yeah.
puddle analogy. Yeah, Peter Singer's book, The Life You Could Save, I think is a wonderful book, and it's made me really consider what types of actions that I personally want to do as far as what I feel I'm obligated to do. Um, and sorry, Kane B, I think, has also released some very interesting videos on YouTube about moral obligation, considering like how bad people really are morally if they don't do these things.
Hmm. Gotcha, gotcha. Cool. Well, I wrote those names down. Well, yes, I already know Singer, but I wrote down all the other names you listed today, and I'll definitely check those out. But yeah, I was trying to think. Oh, the one other topic we'll get into it a little bit, but then maybe we'll get more into it if we end up talking about veganism at some point. But when we are deciding what sentience is, like when let's say a human reaches sentience, what is it about sentience that you value? And I'll point. I think a lot of people don't understand sentience, and I'll even be one of those people that doesn't have the fullest understanding of sentience. But this idea of perceiving things, this idea that if you touch something, you can like so somebody could be completely blind and touch something and they're perceiving the feeling of this thing they're touching. But also somebody can not be blind and they can see things. They're perceiving what they're seeing happen. There's elements of pain and pleasure. There's all these different things. But if you were to take an individual that let's just say you take a human, a 24-year-old human, and you start removing elements of sentience, what's the bare minimum of an element of sentience where you'd go, this is where this thing deserves to not be killed, or something like that. What would be one or two, like what would be the combination of elements of sentience that would make you value it? What if you could just perceive pleasure and pain, but you couldn't sense anything else? There's no smell, no sight, no like touch. Anyways, not the best question ever, but maybe you have a thought on that rambling I just did.
You're fine. I don't claim to know the solution to the hard problem of consciousness. I wish I did.
Mhm.
I really wish I did. There are people who have written books. A lot of literature exists on this type of thing. Um, Now, what I claim to care about, particularly, the best way I can probably sum it up is like mental states is probably the bare minimum that I can point to and say, like, that's definitely consciousness.
Mm.
And the types of things that I can point to that like that consists of are thoughts and dreams and emotions and hopes and desires and values and preferences and all sorts of things. So I can kind of ostensibly point to those things, but I might not be able to give you a hard set. This is what consciousness is. This is, what I care about. But there are people like Dan Dennett and others who have written wonderful books. I have a book called Consciousness Explained. It's a very text heavy book, but very interesting read.
Gotcha. Awesome. Cool. Well, anyways, I think that was a great talk. I'm glad that you were here, and we should set up another one at some point.
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to talk about veganism.
Awesome. All right.
I
Well,
actually wore my vegan shirt
oh,
today.
nice. Awesome. Yeah, and I have a lot to say on that topic. There's a lot of nuance, and I'm very curious to go over that with you. But yeah. All right. Well, I hope you have a good day, and I will talk to you soon.
Awesome. See ya. Appreciate it.
Yep. Yep. Take care.